The first time I noticed something was wrong, it wasn't the silence. It was the eyes. Dozens of them, reflecting the glow of my flashlight from the tree line like tiny mirrors, motionless, unblinking, watching. At first, I thought it was just deer. There were plenty of them in these woods, but deer don't usually stand in perfect stillness for that long. They don't tilt their heads at the exact same angle, all at once, as if pulled by an invisible string. That night was the beginning, though I didn't know it then. I only felt the kind of unease that settles in your bones and makes you question whether you should take one more step forward or turn back while you still can. The forest had always been my refuge, a quiet escape from the buzzing hum of city life. My family owned a small cabin on the edge of Black Hollow Woods, and I had grown up spending summers there. The air always smelled of pine and damp earth, and the sound of cicadas in July was like a lullaby. But when I returned as an adult, hoping for peace after a bitter breakup, I found something different. The woods didn't feel welcoming anymore. They felt aware. The first night, I set my bag down in the cabin and poured myself a glass of whiskey. I sat on the porch swing, letting the night wrap around me. Normally, you'd hear the forest buzzing with life, crickets chirping, owls calling, the occasional rustle of something small in the underbrush. But there was none of that. Just silence, thick and absolute, the kind that presses against your eardrums until you start to hear your own heartbeat. Then came the eyes. At first, scattered, here, there, like stars between the trees. Then more. Dozens, maybe 100, all reflecting the faint glow of my porch light. I squinted, thinking maybe I was imagining it, but no, they were real. Shapes shifted in the dark. Small ones, larger ones. Not moving toward me. Not moving away. Just waiting. The next morning, the woods seemed normal enough. Sunlight cut through the branches, dappling the ground in golden patches. Birds chirped overhead, squirrels chattered, and I almost convinced myself I had been drunk and paranoid. I set about chopping some firewood and fixing the leaky roof shingles. For a while, it felt like the cabin I remembered. But the animals wouldn't stop watching. A fox appeared near the tree line mid-morning. At first, I was glad to see it. Foxes were rare around here, but something about it was off. Its fur was patchy, tufts missing as though it had been burned. It stared at me with glassy, pale eyes, its mouth slightly open, tongue lolling in the dirt. And it didn't move. Not when I shifted. Not when I walked closer. It just stood there, head cocked at an angle too sharp, too unnatural, as if its neck bones weren't quite right. When I finally waved an arm and shouted, the fox didn't run. It dropped onto its belly, claws scraping into the soil, never blinking, never breaking eye contact. A cold shiver slid down my spine. I backed into the cabin and shut the door. Inside, the walls felt too thin. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind through the rafters made me think of that fox. I pulled the curtains shut, but even then I swore I could feel it waiting. By nightfall, the silence returned. Not a cricket. Not a bird. Only the sound of branches scratching against the windows like fingers. I didn't sleep. I sat in bed, listening, flashlight in hand, waiting for something I couldn't name. Sometime past midnight, I heard it. Scraping. Not outside, the noise came from under the floorboards. Slow, deliberate, as though claws dragged across wood grain. Then, soft, guttural sounds, like the low growl of an animal that wasn't sure if it wanted to reveal itself. I froze, heart pounding so hard it hurt. The scraping went on for what felt like hours before fading into nothing. When dawn finally came, I forced myself outside to look. Nothing. No tracks, no signs of digging. The fox was gone. But I wasn't alone. In the clearing just beyond the cabin, I found a circle of animals sitting perfectly still. Rabbits, raccoons, deer, even a stray dog with ribs jutting from its sides. They were arranged in a ring, their bodies facing inward toward an empty patch of dirt. None of them moved when I stepped closer. Their heads twitched in unison, the same unnatural angle as the fox, their blank eyes unblinking. I backed away slowly, trying not to breathe too loud, until the cabin door shut behind me with a slam. That was when I knew. Something had taken root in these woods. Something the animals answered to. The days blurred after that. Every time I stepped outside, I felt them near. Hawks circling silently overhead, too low. Coyotes standing on the ridge, watching in daylight, not bothering to hide. At night, I heard them scratching, pacing, murmuring in noises that didn't sound entirely animal. It was as though the forest itself had turned against me, every living thing bending to some unnatural rhythm I couldn't understand. I thought about leaving. I even packed my bag one morning, shoving clothes and supplies into the trunk of my car. But when I turned the key, the engine only clicked. Dead. It had been running fine when I arrived. I popped the hood, but I'm no mechanic. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling it wasn't just a coincidence. The animals were waiting again. From the tree line, a dozen pairs of eyes glittered in the daylight, watching me sweat, curse, and slam the hood shut. When I shouted at them, they didn't scatter. They inched closer. The raccoon's teeth were bared, the deer's ears flat against its skull, the dog foaming at the mouth though it never growled. Just silence. That night, something changed. I woke to the sound of thumping, heavy, rhythmic, against the walls of the cabin. Not knocking. Beating. Like hooves or paws slamming against the wood in unison. I grabbed the flashlight and crept to the window. What I saw nearly stopped my heart. The animals had gathered again, but not in a circle this time. They were pressed against the cabin, climbing the porch, leaning their bodies into the walls. Deer antlers scraping the wood, raccoons clawing the shutters, birds slamming themselves into the glass, one after another, leaving bloody smears on the window panes. All of them perfectly silent, their movements mechanical, unnatural, as if driven by something else. I staggered back from the window, flashlight trembling in my hands. The sound grew louder, harder, a storm of bodies crashing against the walls until the whole cabin shook. I thought they would break through, but then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Every sound, every movement, gone. The silence returned. When I finally looked outside again, the clearing was empty. But in the dirt, right where the circle had been, something new had appeared. A symbol carved deep into the earth, precise and deliberate, too perfect for claws or hooves. A spiral, curling inward, with jagged lines branching from it like veins. And at the center, fresh blood soaked into the soil. The animals hadn't just been acting strange. They had been performing something. A ritual. And whatever it was for, it wasn't finished. I didn't sleep the night the animals beat against the walls. Even after they vanished, even after the woods fell silent again, I sat in a chair by the front door with a shotgun across my lap. My hands shook too badly to aim, and truth be told, I wasn't sure if the gun would matter. The animals hadn't looked alive anymore. Not in the way they should have. Their movements had been too deliberate, too synchronized, too wrong. The spiral carved into the earth outside haunted me. At first light, I forced myself out the door, my boots crunching through frosted grass. The symbol was still there, its grooves dug deep, too sharp to have been scratched by hooves or claws. And the blood, it was fresh. Wet. When I crouched closer, I realized it hadn't just soaked into the dirt. It pulsed, the way veins do under skin. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. It wasn't possible. Nothing natural moves in dirt. And yet, the ground seemed to breathe, ever so faintly, as if the spiral itself were alive. I wanted to get in my car and drive until I couldn't see the tree line anymore. But the engine was still dead, and the nearest town was 12 miles down a winding dirt road through Black Hollow woods. Walking meant threading through the same forest that seemed to be watching me. Still, I couldn't stay in the cabin. Not with that thing outside. I packed a backpack, flashlight, extra batteries, some food, a hunting knife, and started down the road. The forest was quiet in the morning, but it wasn't the kind of quiet that makes you feel at peace. It was the kind that swallows you whole. No birds, no wind, not even the trickle of the creek that usually ran by the trail. Just silence, broken only by my boots against gravel. A few miles in, I started to feel it, the sensation of being followed. I glanced back every few minutes, convinced I'd catch a glimpse of something moving between the trees, but the road was always empty. Still, the feeling grew heavier with every step, like invisible eyes drilled into my back. When I finally stopped to rest, sitting on a fallen log to catch my breath, I noticed something strange. A rabbit sat a few feet away, staring at me. Nothing unusual, except that it didn't move. Not when I shifted. Not when I threw a small rock toward it. It just sat there, chest still, no sign of breathing. I stood, heart pounding. That was when I saw the others. In the branches above me, owls, dozens of them, perched in absolute silence, their heads all turning toward me in unison. On the road behind me, 3 deer stood shoulder to shoulder, their ribs visible through patchy skin, eyes glazed over like milky glass. The rabbit twitched its head at that same unnatural angle, and suddenly all of them began to move at once. Not charging, not fleeing, just walking toward me, every step perfectly measured, perfectly synchronized. I ran. Branches clawed at my face as I tore down the road, lungs burning, heart hammering so loud it drowned out everything else. I didn't dare look back, but I could hear them, hooves clattering, wings flapping, claws scratching against gravel. They weren't chasing fast. They didn't need to. Their pace was steady, relentless, as though they already knew I couldn't outrun them. By some miracle, I spotted a hunting cabin off the trail, half hidden by brush. I bolted inside, slamming the door and dragging a heavy wooden table across it. My chest heaved, sweat soaking through my shirt, but the silence outside made it worse. I pressed my ear to the door. Nothing. No movement. No scratching. Just the forest holding its breath. I thought maybe I had lost them. Maybe they weren't even real. Maybe my mind was unraveling in this place. But then I smelled it. Ruh. The thick, cloying stench of decay seeped under the door. My stomach lurched as I turned. On the cabin floor, in the corner, something twitched. At first, I thought it was a rug, but then it lifted. A mass of fur and bone, stitched together by roots and sinew, shifting like it was trying to stand. A deer's skull protruded from one side, a bird's wing from another, rabbit legs kicking in spasms that weren't natural movement but convulsions, jerks of some awful command. The thing dragged itself an inch forward, and I froze. My flashlight beam caught its eye sockets, empty, but glowing faintly with a pale green light. I grabbed the hunting knife and backed against the wall, but before I could do anything, the creature collapsed, as if its strings had been cut. The stench lingered, but it didn't move again. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the knife. Whatever was happening in these woods, it wasn't just animals acting strange. Something was building them into things. And the spiral, God, the spiral, was at the center of it. I stayed in that cabin until nightfall, too afraid to step back onto the road. But the woods don't give you peace. As darkness fell, the sound began. Not scratching. Not thumping. Singing. It came from the trees, high and low, hundreds of voices in unison. Animal cries bent into unnatural tones, howls stretched into words that weren't human, bird calls strung into melodies that made my teeth ache. The forest was singing, chanting in a language I couldn't understand. I clamped my hands over my ears, rocking back and forth, but the sound drilled into my skull. I don't know how long it lasted. Hours, maybe. When it finally stopped, I realized I was crying, my face wet with tears I hadn't noticed. And then I heard a knock. Soft. Gentle. At the cabin door. My breath caught. I didn't move. The knock came again, louder this time. Then a voice, low and broken, speaking my name. My blood ran cold. It was my ex-girlfriend's voice. I hadn't told anyone I was here. She couldn't possibly know. And yet, there it was, her voice, cracking on the edges like an animal trying to mimic human speech, whispering my name over and over until it became a chant. The table rattled as something pushed against the door. I bolted out the back window, hitting the ground hard and rolling into the brush. My ankle twisted, but I forced myself up, sprinting into the night. The wood swallowed me, branches tearing my clothes, roots tripping my steps, but I didn't stop. Not until I collapsed in another clearing, gasping, throat raw, every muscle screaming. When I finally looked up, I wished I hadn't. The clearing was filled with animals again, dozens of them forming a perfect circle around me. But this time, there was something else. In the center of the spiral carved into the dirt, something was rising. Not an animal. Not human. A shape made of writhing roots, bones, and fur, twisting into form, taller and taller, its head brushing the lowest branches. Its eyes glowed that same pale green, and when it opened its mouth, I understood the singing. It wasn't the animals. It was this. And it wanted me. The shape that rose from the spiral was not a creature I could recognize. It wasn't bound to a single body. It was a shifting mass of what the forest had claimed and reassembled. Antlers fused to wings, ribs woven with branches, teeth sprouting in places they shouldn't. Its face was a blur of bone and bark, a mask that changed every time I blinked. The pale green glow in its eyes burned through the clearing like twin lanterns, and when it opened its mouth, a sound poured out that wasn't meant for human ears. It wasn't a roar. It wasn't a scream. It was every animal sound twisted together, an orchestra of howls, screeches, chirps, and groans layered into one terrible voice. The ground shook beneath me as if the earth itself was recoiling from the noise. The animals in the circle responded immediately. Their bodies convulsed, jaws snapping open, blood foaming from their throats as they mimicked the sound. One by one, they collapsed, twitching violently, until their bodies lay still, their eyes wide open, glassy and pale. Then the spiral drank. I swear to God, I saw the blood leaking from their corpses trickle across the dirt, drawn toward the center of the spiral as if pulled by gravity. The earth throbbed beneath me, veins of red spreading outward. The thing that had risen grew taller, thicker, its roots driving deeper into the ground. I tried to run. My body screamed at me to flee, but the circle was unbroken. Every path I took, I found another carcass, another wall of bodies staring blankly into nothing. It was like being trapped inside the eye of a storm. Then it looked at me. The shifting face stopped changing for just a moment, fixing into something that resembled a human. Skin stretched too thin over bone, lips peeling back into a smile that showed no teeth, only blackness. The voice that came from it wasn't the forest's song. It was words. Clear. You came back. I froze. The words didn't make sense. I had never been here before, at least, not to this. The cabin, yes. The woods, yes. But not this circle, not this ritual. I don't know what you are, I whispered, though my voice cracked with fear. I don't know what you want. Its head tilted. You. The spiral pulsed again, and I felt something inside me twist, like an invisible hand had gripped my stomach and turned it inside out. I dropped to my knees, gagging, the taste of iron flooding my mouth. Blood dripped onto the dirt, joining the veins that fed the spiral. The thing stepped forward. Its body didn't move naturally. Every shift of limb or antler or wing was like stop motion, jerky and abrupt. Yet it loomed closer, bending down until its face was inches from mine. I could smell the rot of wet earth and carrion clinging to it. I shut my eyes, bracing for whatever came next. But instead of an attack, I felt heat. Not fire. Breath. Its whisper slid into my ear like a knife. Follow. And then, silence. When I opened my eyes, the clearing was empty. No animals. No spiral. No thing. Just me, kneeling in dirt, my clothes soaked with blood that wasn't all mine. The trees loomed overhead, swaying though there was no wind. I staggered to my feet, disoriented, every muscle screaming. My mind told me to leave the woods, to find the road, to run until I saw a single streetlight. But another part of me, something deep, primal, infected, pulled in the opposite direction. Toward the heart of the forest. Toward whatever had whispered, follow. I don't know how long I walked. Hours blurred together. The forest shifted around me, familiar paths bending into places I didn't recognize. At times, the trees seemed closer, their trunks crowding in as if to corral me. My flashlight flickered even with new batteries, shadows lengthening into impossible shapes. And always, I felt eyes on me. Once, I turned too quickly and caught sight of a wolf. It stood only a few feet away, ribs jutting through patchy fur, lips peeled back in a silent snarl. But it didn't attack. Instead, it lowered itself to the ground and crawled ahead of me, as if leading the way. When I slowed, it stopped. When I moved again, so did it. I was being guided. The deeper I went, the worse the air smelled. Rot and sulfur, thick enough to choke on. My throat burned, my stomach twisted, but I couldn't stop. Every instinct told me this was wrong, but something stronger had taken hold. Finally, the trees opened into another clearing. This one wasn't empty. At its center stood what looked like the ruins of a stone well, old and crumbling, half swallowed by roots. Around it, more animals gathered, not alive, not dead, half-rotten things stitched together by vines, their bodies twitching in unnatural spasms. The wolf joined them, sinking into the circle with a shudder, as though it had fulfilled its task. I should have turned back. I should have run. But my feet carried me forward until I stood at the edge of the well. Inside, darkness. Not the absence of light, but something thicker, alive. It writhed like smoke, tendrils reaching upward. And faintly, from within, a sound. Not the chorus of the forest. A single voice. Familiar. It was my mother's voice. She'd been dead for years. My breath caught in my throat as the voice called my name, warm and soft, just like I remembered. My knees buckled. My mother had never been here. She couldn't be here. And yet her voice was rising from that pit, echoing off the stones, sweet and desperate. "Help me!" I stumbled back, shaking my head. "No. You're not her. You can't be." But the voice grew louder, weaving between words I recognized and ones I didn't, syllables that bent wrong in my ears. The animals around the circle began to twitch faster, their jaws snapping open and shut in rhythm, bones cracking with each convulsion. The spiral carved in the first clearing had been a doorway. This was the threshold. And the thing inside the well, it wanted me to believe. To give in. I screamed into the darkness. "What are you?" The voice stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. And then, from the depths, it rose. A hand. Not flesh. Not bone. A hand of roots, slick with blood, clawing up the stones. Another followed. Then a face, too many eyes, all glowing pale green. It was climbing out. The animals dropped one by one, their bodies crumpling as if whatever force held them was being drained into the well. The air shook with pressure, the ground splitting in cracks that bled red. And I realized something too late. It wasn't calling me here to follow. It was calling me here to feed. The roots lashed outward, snapping like whips. One struck my arm, burning my skin where it touched. Another coiled around my leg, yanking me closer to the well. I hacked at it with a hunting knife, screaming, but every cut only made it grow back, thicker, angrier. The voice rose again, louder, layered with 100 more beneath it. Men, women, children, all crying out in unison. Some begged. Some laughed. Some screamed. My mother's voice was among them, repeating my name until it dissolved into static. I clawed at the dirt, trying to pull free, but the roots dragged me closer. The rim of the well scraped against my chest. The darkness inside pulsed like a living thing, and for a moment I saw shapes within it. Faces stretched too long, mouths hanging open in eternal screams, bodies fused with branches and antlers. The forest wasn't just acting strange. It was being consumed. Everything alive was fuel for whatever this was. And I was next. I raised the knife one last time and drove it into my own trapped leg where the root held me. Pain exploded, but the root recoiled with a screech. I fell backward, rolling free from the rim, scrambling onto hands and knees. The thing inside the well roared. The sound split the night, a cacophony that shook the trees and split stone. The animals around the circle twitched violently, then burst, blood and fur spraying the ground like the forest itself was tearing apart. I ran. I don't remember how. I don't remember where. Only that I ran until my lungs felt like fire and my vision blurred. The singing chased me, voices overlapping, a chorus promising that it wasn't over. That I would never leave the forest. That I already belonged to it. When I finally collapsed against a tree, miles from the clearing, I was shaking too hard to move. My leg was bleeding badly, the root's burn still etched deep in the wound. But the forest was quiet again. Empty. Waiting. I pressed my forehead to the bark, gasping, and whispered to myself, over and over, as if the words could protect me. "It's not natural. It's not natural. It's not natural." But deep down, I knew the truth. The forest wasn't just sick. It wasn't just cursed. It was alive. And it wanted me. I don't know how long I stayed at the base of that tree. Time seemed to unravel in the forest, slipping between my fingers like water. At one point, I thought I saw dawn bleeding through the canopy, pale gray light touching the branches. But when I blinked, the forest was dark again, as if the sun had been erased. The wound on my leg burned. The flesh around it wasn't just torn, It was changing. Dark veins spread outward from the root's touch, curling under my skin like black rivers. Every so often, the veins pulsed, and I swore I could feel the forest breathing through me. I tried to press my shirt against it, tried to stop the spread, but nothing worked. The infection wasn't blood-borne. It was something deeper, something older. My only thought was to keep moving. If I stayed still, the forest would claim me. Maybe it already had. The woods weren't silent anymore. They whispered. At first, I thought it was wind, but then I realized the leaves moved without air. The sound was voices, hundreds of them, murmuring in a language that brushed the edge of comprehension. I caught fragments, my name, the word return, and something that might have been harvest. Branches shifted ahead, and I froze. A figure stepped out of the shadows. Not an animal. Not the root-stitched abominations I'd seen before. A man. He was dressed in hunting gear like mine, though torn and soaked with mud. His face was pale, eyes glazed with the same pale green glow I'd come to fear. But when he spoke, it wasn't a growl or chant. It was English. "You shouldn't have come back." My throat closed. Back. I've never. The man tilted his head, smiling faintly. Not in this life. Before I could respond, his jaw cracked open wider than any human should. From his mouth poured a stream of black smoke, thick and writhing. The forest around him bent toward it, as though feeding. I stumbled backward, knife raised, but he didn't move closer. He just kept exhaling, the smoke curling upward into the branches. When it touched the leaves, they shriveled instantly, falling in clumps. The forest was feeding, but it was also dying. I ran again, deeper into the trees, ignoring the stabbing pain in my leg. The whispers grew louder with every step, words overlapping until they became unbearable. Finally, I broke through into another clearing. This one was different. No spiral in the dirt. No carcasses. Instead, dozens of wooden totems stood in a circle. Each was carved crudely into the shape of an animal. Wolves, deer, owls, but their proportions were wrong. Too many eyes, too many limbs, mouth split open as though screaming. At the center of the circle stood a massive tree, older than anything I'd ever seen. Its trunk was wider than a house, its bark blackened and split. Roots coiled outward across the ground, pulsing faintly with that same green glow. The sight froze me, because hanging from those roots were people. Bodies. Men and women suspended by vines that pierced their skin, their faces slack, eyes open but unseeing. Some looked decades old, their flesh shriveled. Others looked recent, their skin still fresh, their lips moving faintly as though whispering. I gagged, bile rising in my throat. This was the source. The heart of it. The forest didn't just consume animals. It consumed people too. One of the hanging bodies twitched. Its head jerked up, eyes snapping to mine. Its lips moved, and in a voice that cracked with rot, it spoke my name. I stumbled back, shaking my head. No. No, you're not real. But then another spoke. And another. Soon the entire circle of bodies whispered my name in unison, their voices weaving into a chant that made the tree pulse brighter. The roots shifted, tearing free from the soil, and the ground trembled. Something beneath the tree was waking. I turned to run, but the path behind me was blocked. The totems had moved. Their wooden heads turned toward me, jaws splitting into grins. One by one, they toppled from their posts, hitting the ground and shattering, not into wood, but into flesh. Animals spilled out where the totems had stood, their bodies broken and bent, crawling toward me on shattered limbs. Their eyes glowed, their mouths hung open, and they began to sing. That same awful chant. The one from the first night. I sprinted toward the only gap between them, slashing with my knife when one lunged at me. Its body split like bark peeling, spraying sap that smelled like blood. My boots slipped in the muck, but I forced my way through, tearing into the trees. Behind me, the singing grew louder, joined by the voices of the hanging corpses. The ground shook with every step, roots bursting through the soil to chase me. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't care. Anywhere but here. But the forest doesn't let you choose. The trees bent again, funneling me toward another clearing. This one smaller, darker. In its center stood a stone altar, covered in carvings that mirrored the spirals I'd seen before. Dried blood crusted its surface. And on the altar lay a journal. I froze, chest heaving. The book was old, leather-bound, its pages warped with moisture. My trembling hands reached for it before I could think. The writing inside was shaky, but legible. Notes. Observations. The forest is not sick, it is hungry. It calls in cycles, every 30 years. The animals are only the beginning. They soften the barrier. The spiral is a door. The tree is the mouth. The well is the stomach. It does not want all of us. It only wants one. The one who returns. I felt my heart stop. The last page was signed. By my grandfather. I dropped the journal like it had burned me. He'd lived here once, decades ago, but never spoke of it. He'd warned my father to stay away from Black Hollow Woods. My father had repeated the warning to me. And I hadn't listened. The whispers in the forest grew louder, circling the clearing. The ground pulsed beneath my feet. I wasn't here by accident. I was the return. The altar trembled. Roots snapped upward, wrapping around it, pulling the journal back into the earth. And then the voice came again, deep and resonant, echoing through the trees. You are ours. I bolted, knife clenched, sprinting blindly. I didn't care if the trees bent, if the forest shifted. I had to find a way out. But no matter which direction I ran, the woods always brought me back. To the altar. To the tree. To the well. To the spiral. The forest wasn't a place. It was a trap. A living labyrinth. And it had been waiting for me. By the time I collapsed, gasping, I knew the truth. There was no leaving. Not the way I came. If I wanted to survive, I'd have to face whatever waited at the center. The forest animals weren't acting strange. They were warnings. And I was out of time. The forest was no longer just alive. It was awake, conscious, and watching. The air trembled with the sound of countless creatures moving in unison, their paws, claws, and hooves striking the ground in an unnatural rhythm that made the earth pulse like a drum. The trees groaned, bending as though they too were part of the hive mind that had overtaken the animals. Every step I took felt heavy, as though the forest itself resisted my escape. I ran, branches tearing at my clothes, but no matter how far I went, the shadows of animals flanked me on all sides. Wolves with blank, shining eyes glided silently alongside. Birds swooped low, their wings whispering like knives. Even the smaller creatures, foxes, raccoons, rabbits, darted ahead, blocking my path, herding me like prey. They weren't hunting for food. They were guiding me somewhere. Finally, I stumbled into a clearing I'd never seen before, a hollow lit by an eerie glow emanating from the ground itself. The soil shimmered faintly, as though something beneath it pulsed with life. The animals circled the clearing, forming a perfect ring around me, their heads tilted in the same synchronized angle. The silence was unbearable, broken only by the distant crackle of something alive beneath the dirt. I tried to move, but a buck stepped forward, towering over me, its antlers spreading wide like jagged branches. Its mouth opened, not in a bleat or cry, but in a voice. It wasn't human, but it wasn't animal either. It was something older, deeper. The forest remembers. The words vibrated through my skull, and the ground beneath me split, revealing a mass of writhing roots. No, not roots. They were veins, pumping black ichor into the earth. The animals bowed their heads as the veins pushed higher, twisting together until they formed a grotesque figure. It had no clear shape, its body an amalgamation of bone, soil, fur, and bark, but its face, or what passed for one, emerged from the mess. Eyes formed from knots of wood and skull fragments, a mouth stretched from torn hide. The thing spoke through the mouths of every animal at once. We fed you, sheltered you, clothed you, and you repaid us with fire, steel, and poison. Now we take back what is ours. The clearing trembled as the figure raised an arm, and I felt my body lift from the ground as though pulled by invisible strings. My limbs contorted, bones popping painfully as something pushed against my skin from within. I screamed, thrashing, but the animals only watched, eyes glinting with eerie calm. Images flooded my mind, lumber mills tearing down ancient trees, hunters leaving carcasses rotting, rivers choked with chemicals. The forest had been watching, Waiting, patient. Now it was done waiting. I fought, clawing at the air, but the forest pushed harder, forcing something alien into me. My vision blurred, and when I looked at my hands, they weren't mine anymore. My skin cracked like bark, veins running with dark sap. My fingers elongated, twisting into roots. I realized in horror what was happening. I wasn't being killed. I was being claimed. No! I screamed, though my voice was already warping, echoing with the same inhuman tone I had heard from the buck. My throat stretched, my jaw splitting as if my body was being remade into something not meant to be human. The figure leaned closer, its wooden eyes inches from mine. You will be the voice of the forest. Through you we will speak. Through you we will spread. The animals howled, shrieked, and cried in unison, the sound echoing like a ritual chant. The ground swallowed me whole, burying me beneath layers of soil, bark, and roots. Darkness consumed me, but I could still feel. I felt the trees above me, the animals around me, the pulse of the earth itself. I wasn't separate anymore. I was part of it. When I awoke, if you could call it waking, I stood once more in the clearing. My body was no longer mine. My reflection in a pool of black water revealed eyes glowing like embers, skin stretched with bark and bone. My mouth twisted into something that wasn't a smile, wasn't a scream, just hunger. The animals no longer circled me. They bowed. I lifted my hand, if it could still be called that, and the creatures obeyed, scattering into the woods. I understood now. I wasn't here to survive. I was here to serve, to spread the will of the forest, to bring more into the fold. And as I stepped out of the clearing, the whispers filled my mind, guiding me toward the nearest town. The forest wasn't contained anymore. It would grow. It would consume. And I was its messenger.